Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad you are here with us, and just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I'm pleased to feature two guys who are living proof that nice guys do finish first and that you can do well while doing good. I promise you will leave thinking, wow, who knew? And you'll also leave a lot smarter and more inspired than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. Second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors for without their support, we could not keep this series free. Special thank you to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, MedJet, Tennessee Brew Works, Project Music, and Cushmaster's brand of CBD products. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome Paul Katz. Paul is the founder and CEO of Entertain Impact, a leading social impact agency that has raised awareness, support, and funds for philanthropic, social justice, and purpose-driven organizations over the past 2 decades, including the African Wildlife Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, National Trust for Historic Preservation, Rotary International, ELMA Philanthropies, and the WHO Foundation. Those campaigns have been supported by hundreds of influencers, including Kevin Bacon, Ziggy Marley, Angelique Kidjo, John Legend, Lupita Nyong'o, Mark Ruffalo, and the late Desmond Tutu and Usher. Before founding Entertain Impact, Paul led successful music recording and publishing ventures as a senior executive at Jive Records, Zomba Music, and as a 2-time Grammy Award nominee. He will soon release his new book called Good Influence: How to Engage Influencers for Purpose and Profit in early 2023. He also serves on the board of directors for Made in Memphis Entertainment. Welcome, Paul. So glad to have you here, man.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be chatting with my friend, Tony.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And joining Paul as today's featured guest is Tony Alexander. Tony is co-founder, president, and managing director of Made in Memphis Entertainment, known as MIME, a Black-owned full-service entertainment group comprising MIME Publishing, an independent music publishing company that handles the copyrights of some of the most sought-after young producers in hip-hop and R&B, Heavy Hitters Music, a film, TV, and ad sync company with an all-female creative team, and an Emmy-winning music catalog called Beatroot Music, a leading independent music distributor, as well as its subsidiary, Beatroot Africa, and 4U Recording, a state-of-the-art recording studio brand with locations in Memphis and Atlanta. MIME is dedicated to developing and empowering a diverse talent on both the creative and business sides of the industry. Tony also serves on the boards of the Music Business Association, the American Association of Independent Music, and chairs the Association of Independent Music Publishers Atlanta Chapter Board. He's been featured in publications such as Billboard, Wired, Music Ally, Music Week, Pitchfork, and the Memphis Business Journal. He's also been selected as a Billboard Indie Power Player in 2021, Worth Magazine Worthy 100 in 2022, and Memphis Magazine Power Player 2021 and 22, among many other honors. It is an honor to welcome both of these rock stars to our platform. Take it away, Paul.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the kind words, and I very much appreciate having Tony as my co-conspirator here, that we're going to chit chat together. I'd also mention that I am actually very involved with Made in Memphis Entertainment as a supporter and on the board. And we'll talk about Made in Memphis in a little bit. I guess what we want to talk about and kind of framing the discussion is really music as a force, obviously for enjoyment. We know about that emotional resonance, but really music as a force for social change, because a lot of what I do these days is social impact related through Entertain Impact, which you just mentioned, for the last 20 years, and for my other work, because I still do music, still love music, like all of us, I'm sure, on the call. And apart from Made in Memphis Entertainment, I'm also involved with participant media, which makes documentaries like the Malala RBG, the Obama one that won the Oscar, as well as Green Book and Spotlight that won Oscars as well. So maybe, Tony, how do you feel about talking about music generally as a force for social change?
Well, I think, Paul, and I'm excited about having this opportunity to sit and just kind of chat with you a little bit, because just thinking about all the things that you do, plus thinking about the impact that music can make, because music can essentially sell anything sometimes other than itself. And so what I wanted to ask you, and maybe you can kind of elaborate a little bit on, is just kind of give some examples of some of the things that you've worked on over the years that give us a little bit more depth or clarity as to how music can be a force for social change. Because I think theoretically we understand that, but if you can get some concrete examples, that might be a little bit more helpful. Okay,
well, all right, I will. So despite the British accent, I've been in the States for much longer than I've ever lived in the UK. And I came over first in 1985, so a while ago. And within 3 weeks, I was at my wake-up moment, which was Live Aid. And that was in Philadelphia and London simultaneously. And the aim of that, which was founded by Mitch Ure and Bob Geldof of the Boomtown Rats, who we at Zomba published, was to really draw attention to the Ethiopian famine that was going on in the Horn of Africa. And there were concerts at both London and Philly, and some of the world's biggest artists were there: Queen, David Bowie, Run DMC. I mean, there were just ginormous acts, and it was a really good time. But more than that, the single that preceded that, which was called Don't They Know It's Christmas, raised about, in English money, about £8 million. And that was 12 times what they thought. And in US dollars, the whole campaign was over $400 million in today's kind of money. And what that did was basically put pressure on governments as well as funding to provide grain. And so I came away from that thinking, wow, I always loved music. I DJ'd as a kid, through law school, undergraduate, all that stuff. But I really thought, wow, music can make a change here. And so throughout my Jive career, my 20 years, we were always involved in projects. I think one of the earliest ones was called Stop the Violence, which was aimed at the rap community, was founded by KRS-One of BDP with a colleague of mine who I worked with at the time, Ann Carley. And it was about stopping the East Coast, West Coast violence amongst the rap community. And it was very pertinent because BDP, when we signed them, had 2 members, and one of them, Scott LaRock, was murdered before we made our first record. So I thought there is power here that I didn't really understand before. And so a lot of my career has been involved with music as a means of social impact, social change. I'm sure a lot of people here have seen many, many examples. I'll give ones that I've personally been involved with, and maybe more recent ones might be interesting, because what I do with Entertain Impact is I combine the 2 worlds: the music music worlds that I know, that I'm in, that I have networks, and entertainment generally, and also the philanthropy and social impact world, because they don't necessarily talk to each other in the way that we would like, the nonprofit world. However, we act as a bridge to that, speaking both languages and being in both worlds. So let me give you a couple of recent ones. Many of you may know Harry Chapin. Harry founded, apart from being a wonderful songwriter, he founded Why Hunger. And Why Hunger is a social justice organization dealing with food. It's been going for about 30 years now. It has a lot of music supporters from Yoko Ono to Bruce Springsteen, to many, many, many folks. And I've supported them over the years in various capacities. And what was interesting recently was a couple of years ago was that Kevin Bacon, who has an organization, not surprisingly, 6degrees.org, which uses the power of celebrity and influence for social change, was hosting a TV show. It was called Play On: The Power of Music. And it was with Eve, and the two of them were co-hosting. Had a fantastic lineup, actually. And I am fortunate in that I support Kevin and Stacey Houston, who runs the 6 Degrees org, as well as Why Hunger, was able to introduce them. And that particular, what I call multi-pact, business, celebrity, nonprofit coming together, actually raised for them and the NAACP over $7 million. And that's a lot of good that can be done with that money in both those camps. More recently, we worked with the WHO, the World Health Organization Foundation, on a campaign called, it was called Go Give One. It was a $1 million match from Elmer Philanthropies. And the idea was to get more citizens involved in what they call vaccine equity, which is where you have countries that want the vaccine that couldn't get it because the kind of richer countries were taking up all the supply. And so the idea was, if I got a vaccine, I should donate $4 or $5 to the campaign, and they could then go and buy vaccines. And we had MasterCard involved, another multi-pack, basically. It was MasterCard, it was Elmer Philanthropies, it was the WHO Foundation. And we launched it. I'm sure a lot of you know the Global Citizen Concerts that do an amazing job of creating awareness around the world. We launched it with Elton John and Angelique Kidjo in Paris at that concert, and then with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Harry and Meghan, in New York. And that raised, in addition to the $1 million Elmer match, it raised $1.76 million from the public, not governments, not companies, from the public. And that's very important because it gives you not just the money, which resulted in over 500,000 additional vaccines being bought, but it also put pressure on governments to keep going, to give more, not to be so insular looking. So I think the music, the power of music can really be very significant. A little later, I want to talk about the power of individual artists and the power of the music business to do something, because that's a bit of a focus and mission of mine. But Tony, any examples you want to talk about?
Well, you know, I'd like to just kind of dig a little bit deeper with you on that particular subject, because you've worked with so many entertainers, so many celebrities. Do they usually fully appreciate the amount of influence they have or can have in pushing social change, or do they just assume that their art's their art and that's probably the maximum that they're going to be able to do? How do you get them, if they don't already have it internally, how do you get them to understand the impact that they can have beyond the art that they're actually known for?
That's a really good question, and not one I've really contemplated, so I'm shooting from the hip here. I would say it varies. There are some folk like John Legend, who is very focused on philanthropy and has been for a long time, and his management company, Thai, Friends at Work, they're very involved in this. I think Red Light Management also has somebody on board who does philanthropy. And we've worked with John. We worked with John, for example, recently on the Africa American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, preserving Nina Simone's childhood home, where he was very supportive. He knows because he focuses on it. I think some of the artists and we go beyond just artists, we're dealing with actors, social media influencers, but I'm going to stick to artists here because that's very important. Some of them have a connection to the cause, and I think that's really the key. We have a research facility here, and so we reach out to somebody only if there really is an authentic, credible, passionate connection to the cause. And what that does is that gets you to much younger desired audiences. So Gen Z is much more likely to be persuaded by a social media influencer or a musician than a Hollywood celebrity, for example. So I think people are now beginning, over the 17 years that I've had Entertainment Impact, to really understand the power of influence. I call it the influencer effect in my book, but it's very strong. I've got huge amounts of research from Oxford University, Stanford, and commercial enterprises as well that really shows the reach of those artists. However, some of the younger ones don't. They don't necessarily have a management structure around what they do. And so when you reach out, they kind of get it, they don't really get it. But what we do is we measure. That's my kind of holy grail, because unless you know the tree is falling in the forest, you don't know it's a tree falling in the forest. So we measure the impact. So for us, impact falls into a couple of areas. Tactical. Did you get more people to the website? Were people following you? Did they take a CTA, a call to action? And then we can download that with what we call our impact reports to the talent. So when we work with, say, Coming to the Power of Artists, we work with Ziggy Marley and Angelique Kidjo on the End Polio Now campaign, which was getting with I should just mention UNICEF and Rotary and the Gates Foundation, lots of people who did much more over a longer period than we did. We did the kind of the influencer part of it, 80 plus influencers. When Ziggy and Angelique gave us videos or shot videos that were going out to, say, Nigeria or Benin or wherever, they didn't really realize the impact that they could have completely. I mean, Ziggy because of his father and his own wonderful work, and Angelique because of the Batonga Foundation that works in Benin with young girls and women. They have an idea because they had a certain length of philanthropy, of working in philanthropy and having that experience. But some of the younger ones, or some of the ones who were earlier in their career, should we say, they had no idea. So let me think of a good one. Matthew Corner, RCA Records DJ. He was one of the very rare young men when we did this promotion with him, who had a single coming out where he talked about anorexia. And anorexia is not really talked about within the male kind of domain. And he did. And that really fostered a lot of impact. We paired him up with the National Association of Mental Illness. He did panels. He put his heart into it. We got picked up by MTV and the blogs and lots of different people. And so and then we did the impact report, and he really understood the power that could have. And a lot of those artists that we've worked with over the years, and I'm sure a lot of our own folk have worked with themselves and seen this power. It changes your mindset and what you can do. So the answer is choose the right ones to work with, make sure that they're a good fit for you culturally as an artist, and then measure the impact, basically. And
those seem like really good tools to evaluate. But in your evaluations, have you noticed that there's a particular stage in entertainer's career or a particular age that they're more likely to want to get involved in social change or philanthropy, as opposed to just saying, I've got to focus on my career because right now I just can't afford to get distracted, or I don't think I'm suited to do those things at that stage?
Yeah, I think that happens with a lot of us. I think it happened with me. I was just in love with the music and making or being involved with artists and records and the business side of it for many years. And so I only kind of had my wake up moment, so to speak, really where I wanted to do this as kind of more of a career through a few things, dealing with the TJ Martell organization with Tony. And a friend of mine, Jane Warner, who passed away way too young, but whose elegy was, wow, just amazing. And I thought, wow, there's purpose here. And I know you also have a purpose-driven life. I would say it depends on the circumstances that you're brought up in. If you have a family that's very focused on giving back and doing, I think you do it earlier. I would say for a lot of the artists that I dealt with who are coming from under-resourced communities, basically, who are not necessarily coming from the church, but are coming more from the projects and the streets. And this is kind of an overgeneralization there, and also artists who are coming from middle and upper class economic homes, who are young and they just want to get their music done. They do not care initially about anything other than the music. And that may not be a bad thing, because in a way you have to be ready to do this. You have to be educated to do it. And it can't look, and I've never had anyone in the 30 plus years I've been working with artists who has done it for career purposes. They do it because there's a genuine love in your heart for the cause that you're promoting and supporting. But there are a lot of younger artists, they want to deal with the music. They want to enjoy the life. They don't necessarily have advisors around them, because the music business is not known for its structure in that sense. So as a consequence, they're not so focused. But then, and we've done this, for example, with not artists, but there's a fantastic dancer. Her name's Isabella Boylston, who's a principal at the American Ballet, who we just got introduced to through a connection, and pro bono, because we don't charge for this part of it. We basically sat down, and we have this, and it can apply to any artist, so we'd be happy to send this out for free. We have a questionnaire. What are you interested in? Because every cause is a good cause. It's really the one that resonates with you, that you have a personal experience in, that is going to be the most meaningful, authentic, and that you're going to give your time to, because it is a time commitment, and you have to balance family, life, career, everything. So we go through this, and then what we do after we know that is that we narrow it down to one or two focus areas. It could be climate change, it could be youth development, whatever it is. And then we will, on their behalf, give some research on different nonprofits that they can be involved in. And then if they like some of them, we will set up some meetings so that they chit chat. And so they then get involved with people they feel very comfortable with. Isabella was obviously dance and young girls, and we set them up with the National Dance Theatre up in Harlem. And that's been a very good relationship. So it's important that you don't just say yes to everything that comes along, because you're going to get, as you grow successfully in your career as an artist, you could get like 100 requests a month to do something. You would never sleep. You would never do music. You would never see your family ever again. You would be shuttling to, somewhere 3 hours away by plane for no money for 3 days every single week if you accepted everything. So you have to really focus. And I think there are some artists in the earlier days, if you were looking at philanthropy in the 70s and 80s, who did everything because they were very kind. But if you're dealing with 150 different organizations, your potency is kind of watered down. Right. And so therefore, I think it's important that you basically choose one or two and really focus on them. I'll end this kind of part of it by we work with Usher. We help facilitate his work, and it falls into 3 areas: diabetes, because one of his children has type 1; 2, music education in his hometown Chattanooga; and 3, New Look, which is youth development, his own foundation that's been going for, I'm guessing, but 20 years. I think you and I met with them in Atlanta.
Right.
A wonderful organization. I give a big shout out to them. So I think those are the kind of things you need to think about as an artist. And for anyone who's out there, we're very happy to help them with that on a pro bono basis. But let me turn, if I could, Tony, because I'm going to get you to chit chat for a bit here. I'm very big on the power of popular culture for social change,
Right.
and entertainment, and our business, meaning the labels, the publishers, the management, to get involved in what I call the area of cause influence, this use of popular culture for social change, and for it to become a field with best practices and networks and resources. And to me, one of the reasons I got involved in Made in Memphis Entertainment is because it's independent, it's Black owned and Black run, and it has a social mission. So I'm going to throw the ball into your court and ask you to talk a little bit about it, because I think it's a fantastic example of that particular area of social impact.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that it ties in nicely with what we've been talking about, and that really is, we have to understand the context in which we operate. And I do think that the way I've been looking at the music industry, historically, it seemed to me, and maybe I'm just missing what's going on now, but it seemed historically that artists were very counterculture. They were very willing to speak truth to power, and they were social commentators. Now you see less of that, and you see more, I've got to protect my financial interests, and so unwillingness to rock the boat.
Mm-hmm.
But as I look at the Black community in particular here in America, I think about the fact that there have been generations of entertainers that have been the influencers in our community. And they did not shy away from the responsibility of making sure that while they were mastering their craft and doing the things that were necessary to make a living as an entertainer, they understood their involvement in shaping social change, getting involved in civil rights movements, things of that nature. And I think we see that, and the climate is such that we need champions like that today. And so when we think about the history of Made in Memphis Entertainment, it's well rooted in the importance of having a social mission. If you're going to do anything, you need to make sure that whatever you're doing is bigger than you, because that's what keeps you motivated. You need to have a huge vision, a vision that is so big that you can bring a pretty significant group of people under that tent of the vision of the organization. And so there are 2 things that kind of prompted why David and I started this business in the first place. One is when David and I first met over a dozen years ago, he was giving back through a nonprofit organization that he was starting called the Consortium MMT. For Memphis Music Town, a wonderful organization that has been developing the next generation of recording artists, producers, and songwriters. And that it's a free program. It's an amazing program. And what it was designed to do was to make sure that those skills were being honed and developed in those 3 core categories. And I got involved early on. David invited me to join the board. And I served on the board for the organization for a while. And what we identified pretty quickly was that after these students or the individuals in these cohorts graduated, they then moved. They moved to Nashville, moved to LA, moved to various other cities, because they recognized that the opportunities weren't in Memphis. And so that was one of the key reasons why we felt Made in Memphis Entertainment was important, because we wanted to create alternatives that allowed creatives to not only pursue their dreams, but do it without having to feel like the only choice in order to do it was to relocate to another location. The second thing that also prompted this is as we kind of were coming up on the celebration of the 50 years of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what we saw was that the data showed that there were significant educational gains in Memphis from 1968 to the period of, say 2018. And that meant high school graduation rates for African-American students had increased and were almost on par with white students. College graduation rates were up, not quite on par, but they were significantly up over 1968. But what did not really change much was the financial condition of families. In fact, it looked like it was going backwards. So the median family income in 1968 was much better than in 2018. And so what we were looking at were opportunities to allow for people to not only do something that they love, but also find ways to do it in a way that would help them financially. And so Made in Memphis Entertainment has a two-pronged mission, and that is to serve creatives, which is at the core of what we do, but also to develop the next generation of music executives. So it's one thing to focus in on the creative side, but we're also focusing in on the business side of things and making sure that just as well as we're trying to put the tools and the resources in place to support creatives, we also want to put tools and resources in place to develop those executives that will go on and be the leaders of the music industry of the future. And I think one of the challenges that we've seen in the music industry is when we ran into that Napster glitch and the music industry was trying to figure out how to navigate how the music industry was going to go. There was a big gap between then and probably around the late 2010s, where a lot of people came into the industry and did not get an adequate education and familiarity on all of the things that they needed to have in their toolbox to be an effective music executive. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to right that ship by making sure that this generation of music executives are going stepwise through the process and becoming excellent executives without gaps in their development. If you can kind of picture a caricature like you see, people might be doing it on the pier there in Malibu, or they might be anywhere you might go where you're at a carnival. You have this huge upper body with chicken legs because they've developed certain aspects of what they need to know as an executive, but the foundational things that will give them longevity and allow them to effectively serve creatives, they're lacking some of those things. And so we want to make sure that they're well-rounded. And we anticipate that as we continue to develop a pipeline of executives, that we'll see some positive results in the industry over the years to come.
Would you say that the people that come within the Mime family, and we're growing quite a lot with the 4 different businesses, including the sync business, Heavy Hitters in Los Angeles, to me, as somebody who was an observer initially, friend, and then part of the organization, it's people who are just as capable, if not more capable, than most of the people I know in the business. They just don't have the networks. They don't have that social capital. I think that's a big part of what we're trying to achieve as a company, apart from making really good music and being a very, very good business.
Well, that's right. Well, Paul, you've been instrumental in this, so you know this as well as I do, if not more so, is that in memory of our colleague Cindy Bedell Slaughter, who after we acquired Heavy Hitters Music Group, passed away in 2020. One of the things that she was a champion for was for women in the music business, and she also was a champion of making sure that young executives were being developed. And so, in partnership with the Guild of Music Supervisors, we put together this scholarship that we're still trying to finalize, but the purpose of that scholarship was not to necessarily fund tuition for students to go to a music business program and then one day become a music supervisor. But the reality of it is is that sometimes it's challenging if you're trying to break into the industry, that sometimes you have to take these opportunities to work for a music supervisor, whether it's very low pay in most cases, but you can't afford your housing. And so one of the things that we wanted to work out was a cost of living stipend or scholarship to support people so they can get these opportunities that they otherwise would not be able to afford. And so those are the kinds of strategies that we're taking to make sure that when we say we're going to put our money where our mouth is, we're investing in those kinds of activities. I think we all know that after the George Floyd incident, millions and hundreds of millions of dollars were pledged by a lot of large companies, majors in the industry. But I think many have gotten amnesia in recent months because their willingness and their commitment to developing diverse talent and supporting diverse talent and also creating the opportunities, they're not there anymore. 2020, late 2020, everybody wanted to get on social media and talk about what they were going to do. Now we sit in 2022 and you have a lot of small labels of BIPOC creators struggling to make any inroads in the industry, and they can't get any of that same financial support. And so I think that one of the things that we've tried to make sure we didn't do is we didn't spend a lot of time, putting up billboards and talking about what we're going to do, but we actually did stuff. And that's I think that's what's going to really make a difference in the industry, is if people will quit trying to get that quick moment on social media and actually do the work. Because I think people want to talk about the work, but not as many people actually want to do the work. And that's what we're committed to, is actually doing the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen good results with the people that have developed under our umbrella for the last 6 or 7 years since the company got founded by David Porter, the Hall of Fame songwriter from Stax. It reminds me of a couple of things. One, the ability to just help people get a start. There's a company, it's a nonprofit called Year Up that we deal with. And what they do is they take young people who have got a high school diploma or equivalency, but haven't quite launched. Maybe they were homeless. Maybe they were coming out of the military. Maybe their mum needs them to have a job. They can't afford to just go to college. And they put them on a wonderful path at a community college train them for a year and then give them internships with JetBlue and Warner's, the studios and other companies. And as a result of that, 90% of them nearly have a full-time job at 28% more salary than their peers, and about 80 plus get a 4-year degree. It is generationally changing. I mean, it's not just them and their families, it's future generations that do much better as a result. On the other hand, you have, and I'm going to use a business analogy here. In 2019, there was a memo signed by a lot of the big companies in the world, Apple, Amazon, etc. Very good intentions. We're no longer responsible just to our shareholders to make money, which of course, if we look at inflation now and the amount of corporate profits we're making, that doesn't sound so true. But they did say it's the communities, it's the stakeholders, other than shareholders, like our vendors. And they gave a list. That is being, how can I put, to use a legal term, that is BS, because none of that has been implemented. So for me, and I think there is very good intention amongst the Warners and the Sonys of the world who have these funds. I think Rock Nation is doing an amazing job with a lot of this, with Van Jones and others folks. But I like the idea, and this is my cause influence thing that I was referring back to, where I think MIME is completely a pristine, best-in-class example of this, where you have a business, it does well, but it has a social mission. I would like very much to see cause influence be introduced in a much broader sense in the entertainment and music world specifically, where you have best practices, where you have networks, where you have resources, a little bit like cause marketing was 20 years ago and has now grown into a $2.9 billion a year industry. we can grow this because it's not only good for the world, social impact, all that stuff. It is very good for business because there's a lot of academic research that, as I said, Gen Z millennials, which is going to be 30% of the world's population and make up over 1.3 trillion, maybe it's even higher than that, spending power by 2026. They don't want to be working for companies that don't have social impact.
Right.
That's a big factor in their decision making, and they certainly don't want to get involved with companies buying products or services unless there is some social impact. So if you want to reach these desired audiences, which is good for business, you can be good for the world through social impact at the same time. And I think that coming together is really, really important. So I'm going to do a shout out to my industry, which I love and I come from, just to say, keep focusing on that and come to me. We're happy to be a friend, for nothing, to give this information for either your artists or your company, how to implement these type of programs that have real value over the long term. So I think that's very important.
Right. Well,
to do. And we,
well, if you don't mind, Paul, and I just saw, Kevin just dropped it in there. That's ESG components. That it's a Wall Street buzzword, but it is important. Environmental, social, and governance. It's good business for these publicly traded businesses to really prioritize ESG. And so, as we kind of think about what you were just saying, I do believe that if the energy is put into making sure that this is a priority in their organizations, it will not only allow for them to check that box, but it'll also lead to a more profitable organization. And so I do want to say that the industry has an opportunity to make a real impact broadly if they're willing to implement those elements into their business strategy.
Yeah, and I think if I'm putting on my business hat as well, I think that it's a competitive advantage. I mean, to be very blunt, it's not the reason you do it, but if I'm an artist and I want to sign with a label, and we can talk a little bit about the whole DIY thing a little later if we have time. In fact, maybe we'll go on to that after this. If part of that label, in addition to marketing and A&R or whatever it offers to a really good standard, has this philanthropic component it can help the artist with, and we get asked by different artists to do it, I think that's helpful. CAA and the big agencies, they have people in-house that do it. Why don't we as an industry have a person in-house who is knowledgeable, can help artists, make their platform something for good in addition to the music. Bruce Springsteen for years quietly has had at every one of his concerts one of the local food banks. That's where Why Hunger and he work together. He's earned millions quietly for people. He never talks about it, but it's amazing. But then look at Logic. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, the 1-800, it was the suicide song that was put out. It was huge. It had 1.2 billion streams. And a study in a British journal found that suicide rates had dropped 5.9% as a result, and had sustained over a period. Imagine that. You've got a huge hit. You've raised the profile of the artist. The artist is doing it for the right reasons. And look at the effects you've had on your world. It is incredible. So yeah, I really want to get our industry, the industry that, as I say, I've been part of and has been very good to me, to do more of these things, to focus on this. It's not just a money thing. It's a cultural change that we can imbue more.
Well, right. Because if we do change the culture, I do think, as you pointed out with those statistics, it helps from a mental health standpoint. And I do think that one thing that has been shown to help with mental well-being is a sense of purpose beyond oneself, and a sense of community. And these are things that a lot of artists don't feel like they have, because with this huge do-it-yourself movement, These artists are just out here feeling like they're struggling. They don't have any advocacy. I think we even see here in the chat, one of the conversations is like, why aren't we fighting more for, making sure that we understand copyrights as copyrights are labor rights and human rights, and why aren't we trying to make sure that terrestrial radio is paying artists, and these are all excellent points. I think what I would say to that is I do believe that we're starting to see a progress in the right direction. But again, it goes back to what I was saying before, is that we have to change the mentality in the industry, and that starts one person at a time. And so I think the conversations that would never have taken place historically are actually taking place now, where you're trying to get to a win-win solution where you understand that instead of demonizing everybody, and I think, I was reading the book, The Persuaders, and it was just kind of speaking to this very topic. And that is that we've gotten to a climate in our country where we discount everybody on the other side of our opinion as being intractable. Their mind will never change. And so it's not even worth the conversation. But I think that we're now starting to see conversations between songwriters and DEMA. We're starting to see conversations between terrestrial radio and artists. And what that's doing is, I do believe over time we're going to find a solution. It may not be perfect and it might not make everybody happy, but I think we're going to be moving in the right direction as long as we're willing to have the dialogue. The problem is historically is we weren't even willing to get in the room and have the dialogue. And so I think your point on social change through entertainment and entertainers is, if we can get influencers to get people to appreciate the importance of dialogue and the importance for us to get together and have these conversations, and more importantly, bringing the awareness to some people of what's really the case. Because if you think about it, if you talk to the average artist, and I'm not talking about all artists, but the average artist you talk to, they don't understand anything about the music industry. They don't understand how money flows. They don't understand much of what's going on. And so it's hard to really have a conversation with somebody who is ignorant of what's true and what's not true. And so I do think that getting artists that have a platform, that have the ability to influence, to educate, so that we now have an educated group to be able to have a conversation with, because it's very difficult to have a conversation with somebody who doesn't understand the realities of how this all works. But once they're educated enough to understand where the incongruence is, where the lack of transparency might be, where the inequalities might lie, then you can have a conversation. But you can't have that conversation when we're dealing with people who don't even have a competent understanding of how the music industry works or will work.
No, that's an incredibly good point. I'm just going to just mention for the music performance on radio, as the former co-chair of the Grammy Advocacy Committee, I hammered the halls of Congress for many, many years as to why we were only one of 3 countries that didn't pay out performance income to artists on radio, and how much we lost because Europe didn't pay us in the States for performance in radio. That is a travesty and needs to be corrected. However, what you do raise is a very good point. It's the lack of structure for artists, especially younger ones who are coming up, in terms of management and getting expertise. I mean, I'm not really knowledgeable that much about sports, but I think sports agents have to be certified. There's a much more rigorous process and oversight to an extent. Whereas with us, it's often it's the best friend of the artist, and they come up together, and that's wonderful because you can trust people most of the time. That is great. And I look at somebody like Will Smith with JL, who's been his manager for 35 years. They came up together from Philly. They've worked together throughout his career. But Will when he was younger, when he was signed to us as Jersey Jeff and the Fresh Prince, he didn't know the financial side. Jail didn't know. They went back. They kind of went almost bankrupt. He was clever enough and bright enough to overcome that, and hopefully will overcome his current situation and challenges. I know that he's working on that. But many artists do not overcome it. Many artists go, and I've been to so many, taken artists to accountants because they didn't realize about tax. They've signed rights away that they shouldn't have done. Their managers are in name only and are really, you know, it's, in the Christian music business, there was this phrase when we first got involved, we had gospel and Christian as well as pop, was that the artists, the companies don't pray with the artists, they pray on the artists.
Right.
And I think that's an exaggeration, and that's 20 years ago. Now it's way better. But people just don't have the right advice, and there's nowhere to go for it. And you're 19, you know, we all made big mistakes when we were that age. So any comments on this whole kind of lack?
Well, I think kind of what you alluded to before is something that I'm certainly an advocate of, and that is to have some kind of certification or licensure requirements for those who would be managers or representatives of artists, because there should be a minimum level of understanding. I'm not talking about requiring college degrees or anything like that, but there should be a minimum level of competence in order to represent somebody's interest, which is their life's work. Kind of like attorneys. I'm not just saying, you know, like you have to go to law school, but you certainly need to have some kind of licensure test and some kind of ongoing continuing education to make sure that anyone who's representing the interests of an artist knows what they're talking about, because we are dealing with legal rights and, you know, protecting of copyrights, making sure that you're doing what's in the best interest of the artist, making sure there aren't conflicts of interest. Understanding those concepts, I think, are very important. And so if I'm a big advocate of that, because I do think that that would help to better serve artists. And we see it, whether it be at our distribution business, we see it even on the publishing side, where artists really are so desperate for help that they're asking anybody and everybody, will you manage me? And these people are not well suited to be able to meet the needs that they have. And again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the whole do-it-yourself movement, which I think was a reaction to the fact that there was a lack of creative control, there was a lack of ownership, and in many ways, there was inequitable distribution of compensation. And so artists say, oh, let's do it ourselves. But the reality of the matter is you can't do it yourself. You need help, you need a team. And what we have to do is try to create ways for artists to have a competent team around them to maximize their level of success. I think part of the problem we have right now is there's so much noise because so many people are uploading music that'll never go anywhere. They don't have any guidance. And so it's the artists that have a competent team around them that are going to be able to effectively cut through the noise and create meaningful success long term. And so trying to help artists to understand that the DIY movement really needs to be replaced with DIT, or do it together, where you have a team of competent people that are going to facilitate the areas in which you don't necessarily have the inclination or the competence, so that you can focus in on your craft and be the best you can be in that area. But at the same time, have a team of people that you can trust, that they know what they're doing and they're going to help facilitate your success.
Yeah. I'm not going to name the producer, but the one producer that we were involved with that ended up buying his family 13 different Mercedes, and then had a giant tax bill at the end of the year. And it was very difficult. The stress for that particular producer was huge. And we've seen artists, it's not just the financial side, it's the career development side as well. I want to talk about that in the few minutes we have left, because when I started managing record producers, and we were fortunate to manage some really wonderful ones, the Mutt Langers and Barry Eastmans of the world, and the people who did AC/DC to George Benson and many, many others. You would turn down a gig if even if the money was great, if you didn't feel it was and they were the ultimate decision makers, if it wasn't the right career step, if it was kind of going off somewhere that would have a short-term gain, bearing in mind you still have to pay the rent and do all that kind of stuff. But I think there's the day-to-day career development that is really important, and then there's the promotion and marketing of the music as it comes out. And DIY, I think where we fit is kind of a hybrid almost. We're not the majors,
right?
We're not DIY. We're kind of this middle ground where we facilitate and give the tools for artists and producers to have the ability to look after and manage and be in charge of their own creativity and economic benefits.
Right. Well, because I think that what has happened is that the majors have kind of moved up into a place where, in a lot of ways, they're just chasing viral moments. And so they're throwing money at something that has already hit and have moved away from artist development. So there is a real gap, a real need for artist development right now. And so those who would partner with artists to help them to develop so that they can have a successful career, I do think it could be done in an equitable way, so that there's remuneration for both the artists and for those that are making the investment in developing them over time. I think that that's where things are going to ultimately settle over time. Right now, you hear a lot of the talk about do it yourself, but the reality of the matter is most of the success we're seeing right now is not somebody who's completely doing it on their own. They have a team, they're working with organizations that are investing and supporting them. So I think where we're going to land is we're going to have an environment where the artist retains creative control. The artist is also going to retain ownership. Where we're now having to work things out is where historically the artist got 15% and the label got 85%. And then now artists think that they can go to a distributor and give the distributor 15% and they keep 85%, and the distributor is going to do everything a label would do. That is a dream that it will never come true. You're not going to get the kind of label services for 15% of rev share. So I think somewhere in between those models is where things are going to fall, where there is equitable remuneration for both the artists and for those that are investing and supporting them, while at the same time allowing the artists to retain ownership of their copyrights and also retain creative control. In that kind of environment, everybody can win. And so I think that that's the direction things are going. I'm confident that that's where it will land. But I think the whole demonizing of labels, I think we're going to quickly see that artists realize that everything that the label would do for them in the past, they still need those things. And their aggregator or distributor is not going to be able to offer those same level of services. And so they're going to have to get them from somewhere. And so I do think that there's an opportunity for companies that are going to be able to provide those services. And we can even see that if you think about what Downtown is doing. You know, they're moving really into label services because they understand that that's the future. That's where everybody, they're desperately in need of that, because what artists are grasping for is any tool that will allow them to cut through the noise of all the music that's being uploaded to the streaming services. And they need to find some way to get there. And they need to have a knowledgeable intermediary that's going to help them get there.
Yeah, there is, and I know we've not got much time left, but there's one point I want to make, which is there is also, I think, an obligation from TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, etc., to pay artists, writers, producers fairly. TikTok doesn't pay anything. I look at Spotify and what do you get as a writer? If you wrote a whole song and it's streamed once, you get 0.0062. It's just the revenue sources have to come to the table just as much as we're doing within the industry, this part of the industry. And this idea of radio promoting artists, radio earns its living from artists. Spotify earns its living from artists and writers, and they should be cognizant of making less share price, less profits, and supporting the artistic community. So maybe that's a good place to stop, Tom. I don't know. What do you think? We've reached our time. So
there's no real artificial time limit on this. This is a fascinating discussion. As I promised the audience at the start, doing well and doing good is what you guys do. And I have a funny feeling they'd like to hear a little bit more. Can I get an amen in the chat? Please carry on.
Well, I think in the chat there's some great comments, and I'd love for us all to explore them further, because the reality of what we're dealing with right now is we do have an old economy where, as Paul said, in the gospel space, but I think it went beyond the gospel space, of preying on artists. And we used to hear all this, the future of blockchain and how we're going to have transparency. And I truly believe that it's the creator historically that was the only one that wanted transparency, because in the murkiness of all of this, it gives people opportunities to take advantage of creatives. And so when we started Made in Memphis Entertainment, the whole concept was around being an alternative. We knew we weren't going to be all things to all people, but we at least wanted to be an alternative so we could keep people honest. Because if all they had on the table was a bad deal, then they knew they had an alternative to come to us. And so in thinking about that, I think part of our mission is to make sure that as we get more and more people who say they want to be in the music business, to understand that if you're not creating the content, your job is to serve. Don't try to outshine the creatives. Don't try to have your own brand and be bigger than the artist. If you aren't creating the music, you're a servant. And if we can get more people to understand that and to embrace that, then I think some of the comments, even that Michelle is saying about everybody wants to prey on the artists, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I do think that we have quite a few bad apples, and I do think that the tide is shifting. However, we are committed to trying to develop the next generation of music executives that understand that their role is to serve. Their role is to support creatives, and that is their number one responsibility. And so if we're going to see the industry change, and it's not going to change overnight, it started with corruption, it's going to have some corruption in it for quite some time. So we have to understand that as we work through this, the only way we can do this is one person at a time, working with artists to try to make this happen. And so that's what we've done. And over the years that we've been in existence, I think we've done a really good job of not only developing music executives, but those who've kind of gone on to be alumni of the organization. They've gone into new organizations, and we're hoping they're taking with them not only some of the skills, but also some of the culture, some of the values with them. And that as they become leaders in these organizations in which they find themselves, the hope is that the mentality that they were able to learn and to develop with us is going to continue to permeate the industry. And I know we're not playing a short game, we're playing a long game. And that's why we have to look at it as a long game. If we're going to change an industry like this, it's going to have to take a concerted effort, and it's going to have to take some time. And I know people aren't patient, but it has to take time.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of areas. One, the industry can do more good with the assets it has. The artists can also be more, a lot of them are, but more focused on social impact. And then we can do better internally. I think we are doing a little bit better than we did, say, 5 years ago. I do think there is a cultural shift, but like any business, there's a curve. You have good folk and bad folk, and but the more we can be transparent and into the sunshine, I think the better for everybody.
Well, again, and so here's one more point that I would state, and I think it speaks to what we were just talking about, as well as some of the commentary that we're seeing. We're betting on people. We're a business that is technology friendly, but we're not dependent on technology, because we know that music is a relationship business. And we know that if we're going to be successful, we have to build relationships with the artists that we serve. And so our biggest investment are the people that we bring into the organization, not only to develop them to have great careers, but to develop them to also serve the clientele that we have. My point in saying that is because we keep hearing about how technology is going to change the business as we know it. We have a lot of people putting all their eggs in the metaverse basket. We have people putting all their eggs in the AI music basket. They're putting their eggs in all of these different baskets. At the end of the day, we're betting on people. Humans are going to always want to interact with humans, and I firmly believe that if we truly do commit to understanding that you're never going to be able to get rid of the human element in this business. But if we do a good job of making sure that people don't put their humanity on the shelf when they come into this business, that they can have a heart, they can be compassionate, they can have values and be successful in this industry. As challenging as that might be right now, we're betting this whole business on that model, that humanity is going to win and that being a people business is going to win. I'm not a music guy. I didn't come from the music business. I came to this from several other industries, from telecommunications to healthcare, just across the board. But I'm not necessarily, even though this is a music company, I don't see myself as being in the music business. I'm in the people business. And that's why I'm firmly convinced that the design of the business, the design of what I believe the future of the music industry is going to be, it's going to be a people business. And so if we can focus in on that part of it, knowing the humanity is at the core of everything we do, the music's all about human emotions. And so if we think about it from that perspective, and we do build strategies to make sure that that's at the core of what we do, I'm confident of what the future of this industry holds. I'm not going to cry that the sky is falling, because I don't think it has to. But we have to be willing to understand that the same thing that caused the music industry to hide from technology, caused the big crash that we saw during the Napster era, we're seeing the exact opposite now. There's too much embrace of technology to the detriment of the future. And having been in other industries, I know what embracing the bleeding edge of technology can do. It's destructive. Because I think if we look at the history of technology, the bleeding edge never won. It was never adopted. It never became mainstream. It was always second, third generation stuff. And it was always scaled back from the original. For those of us who are old enough to know the battle between VHS and Betamax, we know the difference between what was better, but what ultimately ended up winning the day. And so the point I'm trying to make here is, where the music industry tried to run from technology in the past, and so now you have a lot of younger people saying, well, we need to embrace technology, and so they're over embracing technology to the detriment of the industry. There has to be the right balance. And I think if we don't learn anything else from any other industry outside of the music business, because I think far too often people think that I'm in the music business, and the music business is so different than every other industry. I'm grateful for my background in several other industries, because what that shows me is the music business is not any different than any other business. We need to quit acting like, this is all art. It's not all art. The art is what we're selling, but the reality of the music business is a business. And businesses are very much the same from industry to industry. And so best practices I've seen in other industries, we brought it into the music business and it's working. And so my point here is, technology-driven industries have learned the lesson that the music industry hasn't learned yet. And that is, don't embrace every fad, don't embrace the bleeding edge, because at the end of the day, things are always going to level back to a watermark that's very different than what everybody thought. So I understand why people don't want to run the risk of making the Napster mistake again, but we also have to be very careful that we don't embrace a lot of these fly-by-night fads that aren't going to disrupt the industry the way that we think they might. And so there's a lot to be learned in the music industry by being a student of other industries. I'll just say that, and then I'll get off the soapbox.
Well, I'm just gonna end this with, because I do have to have a call with the manager actually. But I just want to say that there are a lot of companies that we get asked to look at, kind of tech plays, and it's not about doing the right thing. It's about kind of making money, get out quickly, sell it for a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. So I think where we focus is on really mentorship and creative facilitation of the artists, the mime people, the people who work with us, our colleagues and future colleagues. And also the one other thing I'd leave it is also we identify managers or up and coming entrepreneurs who fit with where we are, that we can mentor. I'm thinking of Kadeen Phillips and Power Entertainment as an example, and we can all grow together. Economic empowerment is important as well as creative freedom. So I would like to end on that note, and I'd like to thank Tony for a very enlightening discussion and being such a great pal and colleague. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm glad to be here, and thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you to you two rock stars. This was fabulous. I knew it was going to be. And to the audience, did I promise you you'd leave more inspired and smarter than you arrived? I'd say these guys delivered on that promise quite well. Folks, we're approaching Thanksgiving, and I want everyone to think about what you're most thankful for, whether it's music, or if it's family, or if it's Taylor Swift tickets, if you got them. Fact is, we have a lot to be thankful for, so don't take it for granted. And with that, I will sign off and wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, and we will see you soon. Be nice to each other.
Thank you.